Hey, hello guys, welcome to another video. Today we're gonna talk about typography. Okay guys, just to start, I just wanna point out some little things that you might not know about typography. Typography is really essential at the time that when we're working with actual graphic design, just because we use it every day. So these tips that I'm gonna share with you again, as I say, it's gonna be stuff that I actually use, and I feel like it blew my mind when I learned how to actually apply it. So I know it's not the most exciting topic, but I'm gonna teach you 3 things that you might not know about typography, which is how to create really good paragraph shapes, how to use the small capitals in your actual designs, which is, applying the small caps in your typography, and how to use the baseline grid in Adobe InDesign. So without any more delay, let's start designing. Okay guys, the first thing we're gonna do now is we're gonna go to Adobe Illustrator. I create a file just to show you how this works, so it's easy to follow. So the font that I'm gonna use in this particular design is gonna be Adobe Jenson Pro, and because this font support what is called the small caps. Not all the fonts have this option. Not all the fonts are gonna look good when you use the small caps, so that's a thing to be in mind. A way that you can know that is if you go to the actual glyphs of the font. You can go type, you go glyphs, and there you can actually see if the font has small caps, which is its own section in here, like in the options of the glyphs, show options in the glyphs. It's a thing to have in mind when we're working with this type of designs. One thing that I want to actually start working with is just to show you how the contrast of the typography work when it's small caps. Even though one is smaller than the other one, it keeps the same contrast. With that, what I try to explain to you is that if I take this text that I have right here, let me zoom a little bit. If I have this text right here and let me copy it underneath, and I select it and I highlight the brown fox part of the text, and I click here, which is the small caps option, it's gonna create the text in small caps, and it looks really nice. And I know what you're gonna tell me. Well, Leo, why didn't you just reduce the size of the typography? And I'm gonna explain you why you should never do that. Take a look. If I do it like that, let me copy this again. If I take this text, right? Let me zoom a little bit. If I take this text and I try to do like that, I just try to go to type, change case, and I put uppercase, and then I just try to reduce the size pressing Command Shift and then the symbol that is next to the M in the keyboard, which is like a comma. You're gonna see how I'm reducing the size of the font to a size to try to match the actual height of the X height of the typography, right? And as you can see, it doesn't give you the same result because there is a contrast issue now. You can tell the difference between this and this. This is just a reduced version of the font, and it doesn't match the actual thickness of the typography. So it looks off, it looks odd. So don't you ever try to do that, because it's gonna look really bad. People is gonna notice it. One example that I bring here for you so you can actually take a look how it works and why we're gonna do this is this one. Is a text that it was in one of my books, which is called Type Matters. I recommend this book if you're a graphic designer. Read this book over and over, and I actually try to, keep in my mind all the stuff that they say. They just say little tips about typography, and that stuff is what takes your designs to the next level. Getting back to the design, I want to teach you why you should use the small capitals when you're using, serif fonts. We have this example here, and I want to copy it underneath the same design, and I'm going to apply small caps to the design. So what I feel that it doesn't look fine. For example, this text feels like it's screaming at you, and that's not okay. Let's take the text, we're gonna select it, we're gonna go to type, we're gonna go to change case, and we're gonna put lowercase. That's perfect. And after we click the lowercase, we're gonna go again to the small caps option right here, and we're gonna click it. That looks way better. The same thing we're gonna do here with the 11A text that we have right here. We're gonna click again, small caps. That looks way better now. And this address that he has right here, which is Cheshire WA191D, we're gonna take all that text and we're gonna click it in small caps. But it doesn't work, right? Because one of the things that you need to do when you're working with small caps is always go to the type and change them to lowercase, because that's how they work. You gotta put them in lowercase and then you apply the small caps option. And it's starting looking better. And now let's take the numbers with the small caps with the numbers. It creates an old-fashioned version of the number that is not aligned with that. What I try to mean is like the numbers, they go down. Let me show you what it does. If I select the numbers and I click the small caps, it creates a non-aligning numbers. They're not gonna align with the baseline. They're gonna go a little bit down, like the 7, the 3, and the 9. They go a little bit down in the area. But that's how we actually improve from this to this. And I believe that it looks way better this way. When you're trying to work with your text and you feel like it doesn't look good enough, try to apply these tips that I'm telling you right now, and I promise it's gonna make you look a little bit more professional when you're working that typography. Let's go with the shape of the paragraph. Paragraph shape. Well, in the paragraph shape, it's really interesting because the paragraph shape, as it says, you need to work your paragraph in an order, which is either you go with a long, short, long, short, long, short, or backwards, which is gonna be short, long, short, long, short, long. With that, what I'm trying to say is that's the length of each line of the paragraph, so it creates something more pleasant for the reader. Let me read this to you so you can actually understand it better. It says, particularly when setting a center text, it is important to consider the line breaks and the shape of the setting. A simple guideline is to alternate the line lengths. This produces a much more considered setting, and the last few lines can be judged individually to keep the shape pleasing. Also, keep this basic rule in mind when setting text that is ranked left or rank right. So what they're trying to say in this book is just like, you gotta keep this in mind either when you're working your text in different ways, which would be if you're taking the text and you're working in aligning to the left, you should work it in a long short, long short, long short version. But it's not, I promise it's not gonna look something like that. It's gonna look something more like, let me try to show you how it will look like. It will look more like something like this, but that's totally fine. The problem starts when the text, instead of looking something like that, it starts looking something like more like this. Let me show you how it would look. And that's when we start having problems with your rag, because it's not gonna look okay. So if you have a rag when you're working with your text and it looks something like this is not okay. Don't you ever try to do that. That's gonna look really bad. So if we stick with those principles that I'm showing you right now with the paragraph, let's try it right now so you can see better. It's gonna fill out the text with with this type of lorem ipsum text, and that's fine. What we're trying to do right now is trying to apply this stuff that we're seeing right now. So it's gonna be something like, you take it long and then you put it here short, and then long and then you put it short. So that's something that you need to do with your actual text, and it's gonna give it a better look, and it's gonna make you look more professional when you're working with the type in your actual designs. And in websites, this is really good, because that's when you actually, when you're doing your designs, your UI designs, you create a rag that is pleasing to the eye, and people is gonna actually notice that you are putting your effort in that area of the design, and it's gonna separate you apart from other designers. So keep that in mind. So now that we have the grasp of how you use the paragraph, even when it's centered, again, when we're working the paragraph in another way, which is gonna be racked to the left, you should keep the same thing in mind. It should be long short, long short, long short, or short long short long. It has to have like a continuity of the paragraph when you're not having it justified. That's one of the things that I want to point that out. Let's go with the grids and the baseline grids. Okay, with the baseline grids, we're gonna go to InDesign, because I think it's easier to teach you this. I think it's easier for me to teach you how to use a baseline grid in InDesign, because it already has the baseline grid, and I think it's easier to understand this way. Follow me on this. You're gonna go to InDesign, you're gonna create a new file. It's gonna be 1080 by 1080, and you're gonna name it baseline grid. And in the baseline grid, we're gonna change the columns to 6 columns and the gutter to 30, because the margins are 60. When you're working the margins, I don't want to make this a rule, but most of the times when you're working your designs and you create a margin in your actual composition, because it could be text, it could be images, you can work a grid however you want. But when you're working your grid, if your margin is gonna be 60 or 70 or 80 or 90, half of it, that's what I try to do, it's gonna be the gutters that you're gonna use in your composition. This is not a rule. This is something that I do. I don't know if it's wrong or right, but that's something that I actually try to do when I'm working with my designs, and it's really important. So we're gonna create the file, and when we have this file right now, I'm gonna show you how you can see the baseline grid in this file. We're gonna go to InDesign, we're gonna go to Preferences, you're gonna go to Grids, and And in the grids area, you're gonna see that you have a baseline grid right here. And the start, you can change it to, I always change it to 0. And I change the relative to, I change it to top margin, and I click to the increment to 12. It's fine. If you work your typography at 12, or if you want to have the space of your typography, if your baseline is gonna be 16, you can work it at 16 because it's better. But let's try to do it at 16 so you can see it better. If your baseline is gonna be 16, you click OK, and you don't see anything. And that's okay, because you need to activate it right here in the view options. You click baseline grid, and you still don't see it, because we gotta go again to the preferences, and you're gonna go to the grid options again, and here where you see the view threshold, you're gonna change it to something lower, something like 25%, and now we can see the baseline grid. So with the baseline grid already in place, one thing that I want to do is hide the baseline grid first, and we're gonna actually add some guides to the actual document. We're gonna go to create guides, and in these guides I'm gonna add some rows to the composition. So I'm gonna add 7 because I want it to be a 6x7 grid, and I'm gonna show you how to do that. You're gonna put a 7, and you're gonna change the gutter to 30 because it's half of the 60 that we have in, across the design, because it's a modular grid. So we're gonna change it to 30, and we're gonna click OK. Perfect. We're gonna activate the text tool, and we're gonna actually select here like something like that, like the 3 of the columns that we have in the composition, and we're gonna write something like baseline grid that says baseline grid. Let me change the font to something more appealing, something like Futura bold. Okay, I'm gonna change it to something like 48. That looks fine. And we're gonna change the type, and we change the text. We're gonna change it to title case. Okay, it's looking better now. Okay, it's looking better now. We're gonna take this same text, and we're gonna copy it underneath, and we're gonna take this text, and we're gonna write something that says like, okay, let's write something that says like create a common rhythm. Let me select that because that's too big. Let's change it to 24. I think that looks better. So let's take this text, and we're gonna change it to something like medium italic, and then we're gonna put it something like that. Okay, that's okay. And okay, now we're gonna select here, and we're gonna put some text in here. We're gonna click paste here, fill with. We're gonna click fill with placeholder text, and we're gonna change it to bold, semi-bold. That will be fine. Let's change it to, we're gonna put Futura bold, and that's gonna be fine. And we're gonna change the size from 12 to something like 9 will be fine. And then we're gonna go to paragraph, and we're gonna take off the hyphenation of the text. So with that text already there, I'm gonna select this area right here. I'm gonna create something like that, like a box for the text, and we're gonna fill it up with placeholder text too. And I'm just gonna select this text. I'm gonna go with selecting this text. I'm gonna change it to Futura light, you know, to create some contrast. And I'm gonna change that's okay. Let's leave it like that for now. We're gonna take this text, and we're gonna copy it right here. And let's take a look of how the text looks in the presentation. So as you can see, it doesn't look as bad. There is something that I'm seeing right now. It's the fact that the actual baseline grid is not working because the text is not aligning, and you will see that that's something that if you have experience with graphic design, you would notice that right away. The way to fix that is just like turning on the actual baseline grids that we have, and we're gonna select the text. For example, the text that says baseline grid, we're gonna go with the paragraph options, and we're gonna click right here. If you see here in this option, it says aligns to baseline grid. You're gonna click it, and you're gonna select the other text, and you're gonna apply the same thing. You're gonna align it to the baseline grid. All this text align to the baseline grid. And this text right here, you're gonna align it to the baseline grid. Selecting this text that we have already here, we're gonna align it to the baseline grid. And now we gotta actually expand this a little bit to the bottom because it's actually, you know, it's aligned to the baseline grid. And now if we take a look at the text, it looks completely different, and it looks more professional because the text always needs to be aligned to the baseline grid. I hope these tips are like really useful for you, because they were actually a game changer for me when I was working with graphic design, and it was really important for me to know all these little things, and nobody else told me about this. So I appreciate that you stayed till the end of the video, and if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing it. So that will help you understand that this type of content is useful for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.